Alright, today I'm going to talk about this flag. This is the flag of the United States during the War of 1812. And this is the flag that inspired the national anthem. Now if you notice, this flag has 15 stripes and 15 stars. That is because the Union had just recently admitted two states, Kentucky and Vermont, to the Union. Now, the next flag of the United States would only have 13 stripes again. The Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem, was written about this flag flying over Fort McHenry. In fact, here is a picture of the original flag that flew over Fort McHenry. That flag can no longer be flown over the fort, so we have made replicas of the flag, which are flown over the fort on a regular basis. Now, on Flag Day many years ago, President Ronald Reagan came to Fort McHenry to make a speech about what happened here.
This flag that we salute today is a replica of one that flew through the night, as you know, 171 years ago during the bombardment of Fort McHenry, signaling defiance to the British and hope and inspiration to Francis Scott Key. Some historians have called the War of 1812 the Second War of Independence, the crucial test of our young republic as it fought for its life against what was then the strongest nation on earth. By the end of the summer of 1814, the British had already taken our capital and burned the White House, as the senator told you. Baltimore was the next target in their grand design to divide our forces and crush this newly independent nation of upstart colonies. All that stood between the British and Baltimore, all that stood between America and defeat, was this fort and its guns blocking their entry into Baltimore Harbor. The British fleet of warships moved within 2 miles of the fort and began a bombardment that was to last for 25 hours. Through the dark hours of the night, the rockets fired and the bombs exploded, and a young American patriot named Key, held captive aboard a British ship, watched anxiously for some proof, some sign that liberty would prevail. You can imagine his joy when the next morning, in the dawn's early light, he looked out and saw the banner still flying, a little tattered and torn and worse for wear, but still flying proudly above the ramparts. Fort McHenry and the brave men manning it had withstood the assault. Baltimore was saved. The United States, this great experiment in human freedom, as George Washington described it, would endure. Thinking back to those times, one realizes that our democracy is so strong because it was forged in the fires of adversity. In those dark days of the war, it must have been easy to give in to despair. It truly was a perilous night for our new nation. But our forefathers were motivated by something bigger than themselves. From the harsh winter of Valley Forge to the blazing night above Fort McHenry, those patriot soldiers were sustained by the ideal of human freedom. Through the hardships and the setbacks, they kept their eyes on that ideal and that purpose, just as through the smoke of battle, they kept a lookout for the flag. For with the birth of our nation, the cause of human freedom had become forever tied to that flag and its survival. As the American Republic grew and prospered and new stars were added to the flag, the ideal of freedom grew and prospered.
All right, I'm here at Fort Norfolk, enjoying the nice spring day. I thought Ronald Reagan did a great job talking about the rocket's red glare over Fort McHenry, but he left out a lot of the story. You see, it wasn't just the efforts of the men at Fort McHenry that saved the day. It was also the men that fought in the Battle of North Point, which happened at the same time. See, the British landed forces at North Point and they were marching towards the city of Baltimore. But the Americans had gathered their forces to protect against the British invasion by land, and after a hard-fought battle, the Americans won. This drawing represents the Battle of North Point. But before the main battle took place, some of the militia was sent out in advance to meet the enemy and find out where they were. Part of this group of militia came across General Ross and ended up in a skirmish. And during this skirmish, Ross was killed by one of two gentlemen in the militia. One was 18 and one was 19 years old. These two gentlemen probably saved the day more than anybody else at the Battle of North Point. The place marked with an O on this map is the location where the general was shot. The general was shot somewhere around 1:30 in the afternoon. By 2:30, the two forces had met. And as you can see by this picture, that the American forces were in a tree line, and they consisted of Maryland militia. And the British forces had to march across an open field. During the battle, it's estimated that the British lost over 300 men. 46 men were killed, and about 295 were wounded. The Americans only lost 24 killed and 139 wounded. So they only lost half the number as the British. But the Maryland militia could not maintain their position and eventually retreated further back towards the city. But since it was late in the day when the battle ended, the British did not pursue. The next day, the American forces were in trenches just 7 miles from the city. The British were threatening to attack again, but this is when the Virginia Militia arrived to reinforce the Maryland Militia. And when the British came and saw that they were entrenched, they decided not to attack, especially since they could not overtake Fort McHenry during the water invasion. Without the Battle of North Point, the British would have marched into Baltimore and won. But fortunate for us, men from Virginia and Pennsylvania had marched to Baltimore to help reinforce the men already in Baltimore and help defeat the British. But you got to ask yourself, how did we have time to get there, to get all these men from Virginia and Pennsylvania to Baltimore to fight? Well, we'll back the story up just a little bit more. Because after the British had burned the capital, Washington, D.C., they were leaving. Some of their men marched back through Maryland to get on the ships waiting for them around Annapolis. But the other men marched back to their ships that were in the Potomac. And they were going to sail and meet the forces that were in Maryland already before they went to Baltimore. But the Virginia militia was there to stop them. What happened was called the Battle of the White House. It wasn't what we call the White House today. The White House then was actually a White House on a hill looking over the river in what is now Fort Belvoir. Captain Porter of the United States Navy and about 2,500 Virginia militia set up a battery of cannons at White House Landing on Belvoir Neck on the afternoon of September 1st. The wind was blowing for the west, so the British ships were not able to move quickly down the river. So from September 3rd until September 5th, the Virginia militia was able to hold the British. And during this time, the British fired Congreve rockets and bombs into the air. On several occasions, the British tried to come ashore and dislodge the Virginians, but each time the Virginians fought back and prevented them from coming ashore. But then, on September 5th, the wind changed directions, and the British were able to sail quickly past the battery and down the Potomac. It was this delay during the Battle of the White House that gave us time to march the men to Baltimore and save the day. Now, why would the Virginians march to Baltimore to fight? Well, it wasn't the first time that the Virginia militia had fought the British. We had fought them at what was called the Battle of Craney Island that occurred around here just down the river from Fort Norfolk at Craney Island. Craney Island is located on the Elizabeth River, and today it's used by the Navy as a fuel depot. But in 1813, it was actually an island. It was the men that were stationed here at Fort Norfolk and the Virginia Militia that was stationed in the area, and some of the U.S. Navy that was also stationed in the area, that helped us win the Battle of Craney Island. We were outnumbered. We only had about 750 men on the island, and the British attacked with a force of over 3,000, closer to 4,000 men. The British landed over 2,000 men at Hoffler's Creek and marched towards Craney Island. They also were rowing 50 barges full of men towards the island, and each of these barges had a cannon on the front of it. The Virginia Militia had 4 cannons on the island, and the U.S. Navy had 3, and they also had 1 cannon each on the gunboats in the river. It was these cannons that drove the British back and prevented them from winning the day. During the battle, it's estimated the British lost 200 men that were captured, killed, wounded, or deserted during the battle, and the Americans did not lose a single man. This was a huge victory for the United States. But during this battle, the British used a new weapon against us, the Congreve rocket. This is the rocket that when it flies through the air, the exhaust coming out the back glows red. Sound familiar? It's the rocket's red glare that we hear about in the national anthem. So next time you hear the national anthem, don't just think about the Battle of Baltimore and the men at Fort McHenry. Think also about the Battle of Craney Island, because remember, we fought the British first, we defeated the British first, we even saw the rocket's red glare first. We just didn't have a poet. And it was this poet, Francis Scott Key, that made the defense at Fort McHenry so memorable and gave us the national anthem. And for that, our country will be eternally grateful.